Okay. All right. So we're here with Jennifer Creed. Thank you so much for joining us, Jennifer, on another episode of Captive to Independent. Sorry, you guys, I sound a little bit like a frog still getting over my cold, so don't mind that. Jennifer was with Farmers Insurance for 7 years. She was on the advisory council, won toppers many times, all the accolades, the commercial awards and life insurance awards and all that stuff. Just runs a really amazing agency. And then about 15 months ago, went independent. And I'm really excited to hear about your journey, especially since it's kind of so new. And I think your reason for leaving Farmers was a little bit different than some other captives. So I'm excited to hear about that. But before we jump into the insurance piece, what did you do before you were in insurance?
Yeah. So of course, first of all, thank you, Mariah. I know that we've kind of had sidebar conversations, for a while going, man, we need to get this done. So I'm thrilled that we're here getting to be a resource for other agents. So prior to my 7 years with Farmers, I was a producer with State Farm for 2 years. Realized that was not a good fit for me. And prior to that, I spent roughly 10 years as a multi-store manager for a wireless retailer. So, collectively, gosh, I'm looking at a calendar going, am I really that old? Roughly 20 plus years in sales management, which I'm hugely grateful for because those skills transferred over to agency ownership, where a lot of agents don't have that benefit and don't realize, the business and the operations side of running an agency. And by far, I'm definitely not perfect at it, but, at least had a general idea going into running a business, what that was going to look like.
Yeah, those skills are huge. Like we were kind of talking about before we hit record, obviously, like so many people are really good producers and then they think, I'm going to go in business for myself and kind of underestimate some of that back end, right? I mean, even just things like your tax structure and your HR documents and how are you going to handle staff and locations and negotiate a lease. I mean, those are all things that you have to be able to do as a business owner that a lot of us don't think about in the beginning. And those skills and management can really help.
Yeah. Well, I kind of think about it, especially as we got learning and doing commercial insurance, and everybody will kind of be able to relate to this. It's like working with contractors. Right? Some contractors want to be business owners. Some contractors just don't want to work for anybody else. So there's a difference between a small business owner, entrepreneur, and someone who's self-employed.
Totally agree.
And I think, from the agency standpoint, there's that. Now, don't get me wrong, like this insurance gig has got to work out for me because I don't want to have to get a real job and I'd make a real crappy employee.
I think it's funny that progression. I've heard that so many times where people are like, oh, you wouldn't want to, I have all these skills, but you wouldn't want to hire me. I'd be a nightmare, right? Because like once you're a business
Absolutely.
owner, to work for someone else.
Yeah. I would be like, I'm going to need you to just leave your business and come back when I've fixed or done whatever the Jennifer way. And I may show up in a hoodie one day and that's just how it's going to be. So yeah, having the agency now for, almost 8 years, we opened our mortar doors. It'll be 8 years in 2 weeks. So that definitely is 8 years. God, I can't even math. 9 years. Shit. I blinked, a year was gone. 9 years, 1st of February, but you get real accustomed to doing things your way, whether that's right or wrong. Mm-hmm. So it would definitely have to be something very lucrative and very desirable for me to go, I'm going to punch a time clock with somebody. It's afforded us a lot of freedoms. It's definitely not easy. None of us, will say that. But it's provided a lifestyle and choices that we wouldn't have punching a time clock.
Oh yeah, for sure. So you were in management for wireless and then you did State Farm. And then did you go straight from State Farm to Farmers? How did you get to Farmers?
So when I was with State Farm, they had asked me to join their Aspirant program, which think Shark Tank for insurance. And I had started that process and got my 6 and 63 for my securities. And as that moved forward, and I'll say from going too far into stories, it just wasn't a good environment. The agent was not a good human. State Farm is very much in boxes, not just from a product standpoint, but from a structure standpoint. And I'm not really a boxes kind of girl. I've learned to unapologetically be who I am And that's what makes me good at what I do. And that wasn't a good fit for State Farm because, I wasn't going to change who I was to fit in their structure. So I had actually started having a little bit of conversations. They were looking at opening a district office for Mutual of Omaha in our area. And I had gotten into some serious conversations with that because loved life insurance, loved developing people, loved educating, but the environment was bad enough at State Farm that it almost ruined me from insurance completely. But then kind of funny, and those who know, I'm in Southern Missouri, and man, my phone was just blowing up from this freaking recruiter who had found me on LinkedIn or Facebook or wherever they stalk us at. We've all had all of them. And I may say this wrong, but I think his name was Eric. But anyway, so he gets on the phone with me and I'm sitting here going, listen, man, I know how this works. I've been in management. I've done recruiting. I've, been in sales. So he gets on the phone with me and he's giving me the hoorah. And I said, listen, I don't want to talk to you. I'm going to need you. If I'm even going to have a conversation, I need you to put me on the phone with whoever I'm actually going to be working with. And I tend to have this knack for not knowing or caring really who people are. As far as in the hierarchy, I just don't. I treat everybody like I treat everybody. And I end up having conversations with people go, is that who you were talking to? I'm like, yeah, so. But anyway, so I get on the phone with this DM and we're talking about my background and things like that. And he says, that's great. We would love to have you on board. And I said, I'm not really sure this is what I want to do. And at the time we had the entry point we were looking at was the, now I can't even think of it. It wasn't retail or
like the subsidy, like career, like.
No, it was the one above that. Where you got the bonuses, you not the subsidies.
Okay.
I can't even think of the name of it now. But anyway, and he says, yeah. So we're talking, 2015. So it was like one of the best entry points, but you had to have certain experience at the time. And he says, the only thing I want to know is what part of St. Louis do you want your office in? I said, listen, Matt, so I'm on with Matt Wolk. And I love him to death. And we still laugh about the story. And I said, I'm not moving to St. Louis. That's 3 hours north of me and I have no interest. So he told me, he says, well, let me kick you over, please, to the DM in your area and at least have a conversation with him. So he did. And I was a little rough on him. I sat down and it was Garrick Smith at the time. If anybody knows him, they know he is one of the most beautiful humans you will ever meet. And I was genuinely blessed to be in his district. I didn't realize how blessed until I started making friends and realizing that that's not the normal. But
districts can really vary.
Oh, yeah, I know. Crazy, right? But I sat down with him and bless his heart, he's kind of doing typical process, right? This is what it looks like. This is the entry points. Here's what we're looking for. And I just told myself, listen, I'm gonna need you to stop right there. I left State Farm and am contemplating even staying in insurance because of that environment. Wherever I go, I'm not worried about being able to make a paycheck. I want to know why you are with your company and why I want to put up with you and your company for the next 20 plus years. So we sat back and we had a very real conversation and it became the Farmers family. So that's kind of ironically, that's how I chose Farmers, was for that environment, for that. And those who have been around a while know exactly what I mean by that. And we had that not just at the corporate level and state level, but we had this beautiful family of a district as well, which that purpose is also ironically, right, led to the reason I chose to leave Farmers as well.
Okay. So when you were with Farmers, so you joined Farmers, you started scratch, purchased an agency. What was that like?
I was the first seed agent, from my understanding. And I use that term very loosely because the book that I was given belonged to an agent who had started back in the 70s. I actually knew him, small town, Missouri. Then it was kind of ironic because when he was still alive, he had actually tried to get me to come work for him and run his agency. And he had passed away, unfortunately, in a car accident. And the book sat for about 18 months trying to find somebody to put it. It was like 150 policies and like
a couple months worth of production.
Right. 70% of those were auto, mono, line, 30, 60, 30 minimum liabilities that literally, Mariah, like I'm not even kidding, the book was dying off. Like we would have to check the obituaries because they were his friends from school that he had wrote and, they were at that point in life and aging. Now there was some in there that were beautiful and still to this day are very dear clients of mine. So, people go, well, you were given. And it's like, I think the commission for the first year on those seed policies was like $3,000.
Yeah, I've done scratch and seed, and I will say a seed is so hard, and for it to be that small, I would have, now what I know, I've been like, no, I don't want that, because that's a lot of work. Like, you're having to contact those people. You have so many problems. It's a lot of work.
It is. We kind of mastered real quick on handling 5 series policies. Over the years, we had a couple hundred here, a couple hundred there come in, and our retention rate was really well on them comparatively, because I learned right out of the gate how to manage those. And I tell people this, it is, I think, the most difficult entry point, because you don't qualify for subsidies. You're not doing an acquisition, so you're not getting that large influx immediately. But at the same time, I didn't have the, 4 and 40 requirements that, your retail came in. I didn't have loans because of an acquisition. I didn't have to worry about paying back subsidies. So as an entry point, it was the most difficult, because it's like, there you go, best of luck. But from a long game, which I try to be a long game person, in a long game perspective, it was the most freeing entry point that there could have been. It's just that ramen noodle diet for those first couple of years to get it up and going. So we started very small, and which is why it set, I think, for as long as it did, is because the DM was very, very particular about who he was wanting to put into that spot, because there weren't any production requirements or things like that. He had to make sure that he was going to put somebody in there that was going to be able to produce without being pushed or forced to produce.
Sure. Makes sense. Yeah. So then you were with Farmers for 7 years, many trips and awards, and even sat on the advisory council for a year, and you were helping farmers to do better for agents, which is amazing. And that we all know that running our agencies takes so much time. So I have a lot of respect for anybody who is willing to step up and do more, do extra. So I know that, so many agents appreciated that. And when you did leave, there was this big outcrying and like, oh my gosh, Jennifer's leaving. And you were such a huge resource to agents. So talk us through, obviously there was a lot of highs in those trips and awards and accolades with farmers and with your growth. And then what kind of started shifting for you that made you think maybe this wasn't your 20-year place anymore?
Right. So, first of all, I will eternally be grateful for the time that I had with farmers. I absolutely tell everybody that, it gave me a door to create the opportunity in the agency that I have. I hear a lot of times people say, oh, well, farmers gave me the opportunity. No, they gave you an avenue for the opportunity. You created your opportunity, and I think part of it is, one, on the highs are great, but in this industry, I don't care, captive, independent, semi-captive, whatever it looks like, you got to be careful about riding the highs too high, because we are a roller coaster industry, and that could be all in one day. And if you get too high on the highs, then it brings you too low on the lows. So celebrate and appreciate and learn from those highs. But remember, whatever everything is right now, it's not going to be. I firmly believed in the organization. Like I said, I had great support, great family. The trips gave me the opportunity to become, friends with agents and people that I never would have, which is kind of one of those unique versus State Farm's things, because at State Farm, they would segregate. You had to be, if you were great, you only hung out with great. If you were sort of great, so they would segment. These people didn't sit at the same tables. And from the very beginning, I had the privilege of sitting at tables with people who I didn't even know how great they were, until others went, oh my God, were you just at a table with so-and-so? I'm like, yeah, kind of a cool guy. They're like, no, you don't understand. I'm like, cool. So, it gave me that opportunity to build relationships that are invaluable. And still, I have very, very dear friends. For me, the what are we doing kind of happened, I think, a little over a year before I left. I was what I like to refer to as cautiously optimistic. Anybody who knew me, I bled the blue. Even if I wasn't happy with something going on, I may not have blown smoke, but I absolutely didn't publicly bash. I think that is absolutely not acceptable. You have the capability of just not saying anything, keeping your opinions to yourself. So, we were seeing changes in the organization. We were seeing that in leadership. We were seeing that in how, as agents, we were being treated. I feel like with some of the conversations that we've all had, it was something's going on, but we can't quite put our finger on it. A good friend of mine, and I won't mention names, but she and I had a conversation, and she has been around probably longer than almost anybody I've known. And she told me, she says, Jen, over the years, we've had a lot of changes, right? You have to be able to accept change in our industry. The only constant is change. But she said, I've always been able to kind of see where they were taking us. Okay, well, we're changing this. We're not thrilled about it, but I can see where we're going. And she's like, these changes we've got going on, I can't see where they're taking us. And I'm like, great. So watching all of these things kind of happen, and I'm sitting here cautiously optimistic going, maybe they'll figure it out. Maybe they'll figure it out. They're going to get it together. And then they didn't. And for me, that came on the cusp of finding some things out that I thought were very dishonest on behalf of the company. Where in the state of Missouri, and I'll just take, because I think everybody kind of knows anyway, we brought on the signature products, the MetLife products, in November of 21. And we had very clear conversations, even as sitting on territory council with leadership going, okay, what's this going to look like? Like, are we going to come in super low? Is it going to be another smart plan thing where we go shoot and we have to make major adjustments? Like, what's this going to look like? We were told, nope, we're not touching the product, at least for the first year. It's proven, it's in the industry, it's separate from the rest of the products. We're good. So it came out, launched in November of 21. And in a couple of months go by, and I want to say it was in end of April, we get on a call going, we're taking like 29% effective the 1st of May.
Jeez.
Right. And we're like, okay, because at that point we were saving households because of
rewriting.
Right. We were rewriting and, being able to keep the home here, move the auto here, and offset and save our clients. So it was a blessing at the time. Well, I kind of got doing a little digging because I'm a nerd like that. So we had taken that 29%. What we hadn't been made aware of is that in January, we had taken 5% and nobody told us. It was so minor, nobody noticed. In March, we had taken another 11% that nobody told us and nobody really noticed. So then we have this big one that comes along that is effective the 1st of May. And we're told 26th, 27th of April, something like that. So we suck it up, right? Of course, things kind of slow down a little bit. And I'm sitting in my office on June 3rd and an agent in the state calls me and is like, hey, you're on council. What the hell's going on with the signature products? I'm like, nothing, right? I mean, and he's like, no, we have this rate increase. And he said, do you know anything about us? No, we haven't seen anything. We haven't heard anything. And he says, well, I chatted in because he says, he had refreshed some quotes that he had done literally within the last week and MVR'd, right? I mean, validated everything. And he came in that day to close them and they had took a huge jump. And he said, I chatted in and chat said, well, it's from the rate increase. And he says, but rate increase was a month ago, what's going on? So I did what I do and I went digging. Of course, I went into my quotes and I refreshed some, and sure enough, they took like a 25 to 30% jump. Nobody knew anything. And so Missouri is a sunshine law state. So, right, it has to be filed and it's public access to file. Mm-hmm. So I'm going, well, shoot, what the heck? There's obviously something. So I go down the rabbit hole of getting onto the state website and researching. It literally took me all weekend because the codes and names that it was not under MetLife and was not under Farmers. It was under, custom signature, something, I can't remember what it was, but it was another one of the exchange companies that it was under. And come to find out, we'd had that conversation on a call about the rate increase on April 26, 28. On May 17th, 2.5 weeks later, the company had filed an additional 25% rate increase and never told anyone. And when I say never told anyone, agents didn't know, our district managers didn't know, and our state leadership didn't know. And I thought, my gosh, I spent 3 days doing digging and researching and to find out what they did and did not tell us. Mm-hmm. The documents that I downloaded from the state site on that filing forwarded to my DM, who obviously him and all the other DMs were in a conversation with state leadership. State didn't even have the information from territory or corporate. And when they, 3-4 hours later on June 6th, I guess it was, finally went, hey, by the way, it was the documents I had downloaded from the state site that they used to release the information because they had no documentation.
Oh my gosh.
And I remember sitting here that morning and it sounds crazy, but my heart was broken because I was so vested in the company, in my soul. And my thought was, though, if this is what they're doing, if this is what we had to go through to find out this information, what's going on that we haven't found out? And it's not as though this was a one-off, right? We had seen where January and March, they didn't tell us about the little ones. We were getting notifications literally the day before or the week after that Bristol West Commission is getting cut, or, and it's like, and those were kind of those initial flags where we're like, okay, maybe it's a glitch, maybe it's a thing, maybe it's a one-off. How many one-offs does it take to not be a one-off? And it broke my faith in the company. And if that was, if they were doing those things that were impacting how they do business with us, because they have a good faith and business responsibility to us. And if they're doing those things, that's impacting my clients, because the reality is whoever made those decisions, they're not the ones sitting across from my clients. Mm-hmm. They're not the ones who talked to the client on Wednesday, validated and said, okay, you're getting paid on Friday, we'll get this done. And Thursday night, it jumped. If we're really good at building relationships, I might maybe be able to overcome that once with a client, maybe, but not twice. There's a lot of things we can't control in our industry. We cannot control underwriting. We cannot control rates. We cannot control policies. What I can control is my agency's reputation and the relationships that we build. So when those decisions that are being made out of my control are directly impacting what could be my relationships with my clients and my reputation, because they don't care who did it, I'm the face, then I can't continue to do business with that company. And I remember sitting here that morning and just heartbroken. I picked up the phone and a dear friend of mine, well, everybody knows it's Jack Jameson. He and I had conversations and adore a friendship with him. And, we kind of been talking off and on. Both of us were like, we're good. It's not time. It's not time. And I remember I sent him a text message that morning. He'd called me and I told him, I said, I think it's time. And he goes, I think you're right. Let's start figuring things out. And it was hard. Like, I tell people, I haven't felt that feeling, that switch, since I got divorced, since I decided it was time to get divorced. And that's what that felt like, because it was losing that relationship. And I know that probably sounds corny, but that's the reason I chose Farmers. And, I had people tell me, well, quitting is easy. No, quitting was, first of all, we didn't quit, we left. There's the difference. And it was one of the most difficult things to do. Easy would have been staying, keeping my head down, collecting the folio that I had gotten real comfortable in, and saying nothing and doing nothing. Hard was choosing to turn off what I spent 7 years building and wake up the next day trying to redo it, because it was in the best interest of myself and my clients. Because when you say you build an agency on relationships, but if you don't truly put those relationships first and how it's going to impact them, then you're just doing sales, with under the umbrella of relationships. So yeah, that was the downslide for me.
So it wasn't even necessarily the rate increases. It was the lack of communication from the company, the faith from the company of, hey, we're going to provide you the correct information so that you can then have the right meaningful discussions with your clients and prepare them and be ready. And unfortunately, we saw that, since you've left in several locations. We see that in Florida, we see that in Georgia, with the midterm underwriting changes that, agents had to kind of get a hold of the DOI. And I think I've been in the corporate world for a long time too. I worked for Wells Fargo, I worked for JP Morgan Chase, and then, obviously as a Farmers agent. And I think that there's this corporate opinion that people can't handle the information, or they have to do all of this stuff first before they kind of notify the people that are going to be impacted. Whereas I think if they had the faith in the people that work with them to say, hey, these are things we're considering, and kind of involve us in that process and let us know what's coming versus denying it the entire way until an announcement, they would be probably really surprised at how much better that would go. Just, like just in the last year, I know a lot of people at Farmers, obviously, and hear a lot of things. And we kept hearing chatter about like commission cuts. Well, I was an agent for 9 years. We had commission cuts in 2018, right? 35% reduction in commission. That was super hard.
Because they hadn't made changes in like 20 years. So our 2018 cuts, they were like, hey, we're just industry, we'll be good.
And it was true. We were getting paid more than a lot of the captive.
Sure.
And so they shifted that. And then when the rumor started again, and we started trying to figure out like if this is right, and would talk to people about it, there's no way they just did that. They just did it. And then I was actually
because they did it again on the renewal cuts and tied it to variable production.
They did it again.
Right. Well, and that was kind of where my started, because sometimes they say people don't see the forest for the trees. Well, there were agents that were looking at the leaves. They weren't even seeing the trees, because I'm looking at the variable comp going, okay, sure, I can earn it back. I'm going to earn it back, but it's devaluing my book value. It's reducing that, because that's all based on your renewals. Right. So you may earn it back here, but you are losing the overall value.
But the problem is again, the company was not clear, right? They did not make that clear that you can earn it back, because that's all you hear from those that drink the Kool-Aid, right? We earned it back. We made more. Right. And I'm like, okay, but business wise, what has that done to you long term? Because we all know that depending on the market, obviously it's better to sell your agency. But that's not always an option. I know agents, like you mentioned, the gentleman that you took over for, he passed away. He didn't have an opportunity to sell the agency for his family, whether that was a factor or not. There's people who have gotten ill. Like I know agents who haven't worked in their agencies for 6 months because of really serious health issues, and they don't have the time to sell their agencies. They fall back on that contract value, and that devaluing hasn't been clear to agents. But with that commission shift, I was actually at the Embrace conference last year when it was actually announced. And on the stage was Raul Vargas saying how he was committed to the agency force. And he's in front of, hundreds of agents while leadership is rolling out the commission change, and doesn't mention it at all. The whole conference, nothing was said. But throughout the group, there's chatter, there's screenshots, there's
because
all the things, because it's coming out. Well, DMs are telling agents, and all of these things. And so I go back to what you had said, right? It's that clarity. Like if they had said to you, hey, we're going to take this rate increase, this rate increase, this rate increase, and we're going to help you through the process, and this is why, that faith in the company probably would have felt a lot different than we're going to sneak this by.
And we
say anything. I wish that was more honest.
Absolutely. And we saw that communication, I think back to, right. So, I signed my contracts at the end of 15, and that literally was just as Smart Products were launched. So, when I opened my doors on February 4th of 16 at the office, we hit the ground running with Smart Home, Smart Auto. I had a couple next gens, in my seats, but that was my beginning policies, and we were great. Right. And we hit the ground running. We were competitive. And excuse you. You're good.
Keep talking. I'm fine. It's just cold that's lingering.
But, so we did that. And then at that 1 year mark, we went, oh, shoot, we came in too low. So we had to correct. But when we did that, leadership sat down and said, this is going to suck. And it's a 36-month plan, right? They're like, we're going to have to take these increases over the course of 36 months to get us back to where we are. We didn't like it. I didn't like it because I looked like a cute little blonde who was a new agent that played a bait and switch at their first renewal.
But, you raised my rates. I got that with both my agencies when I took over. You raised my rates. The other agent never raised my rates. I'm like, oh God.
I know. Bless your heart. But they at least told us it's going to suck, and it's going to be 36 months. And here's what we're going to do. And man, we're check marking. There goes 6 months. There goes 6 months. Right. Or I guess not 36. I guess 18 months, 36 months, because we had 3 increases. So it was an 18-month plan. And then we kind of levelized. We didn't like it, but we knew. And, I feel like it's kind of like parenting. Give us all the information, and we'll decide whether or not it's important to us to give feedback or whatever. But the not knowing is the problem. And that was my thing, is that, and that was kind of my official stance, right? When clients or whatever would ask, I would just tell them, the company changed how they were doing business with the agents, and that was going to impact how I could do business with my clients. And that wasn't acceptable for me. And that was really hard for a lot of people to grasp. There were a lot of people, I remember, and I say this, and if he sees it, I love him to death and he knows it, at the last Toppers that I went to, which was, like 2 weeks after I had put in my 90 days notices, that last Toppers was it July of 22, and Matt Wolk cornered me. And so I said, Matt was my first contact. I adore him. Mm-hmm. And he sat down with me and so like, what are you doing? And so I told him, and he's like, well, that's not a good business decision. We've got this and we've got that. And, and he's doing what he does to, promote the company. And I get that. But when I was able to articulate specifically that why I was leaving, and it was not linked to money. I mean, don't get me wrong. We're all here for money, but my purpose in leaving was not linked to money. He just couldn't. He's like, oh, I don't get that. I don't get that. This, you got to make a business decision. I am, but I also have to make a me decision, because I committed to myself when I left that environment at State Farm. Environment was my priority. People were my priority. I would make the paycheck wherever I was. Mm-hmm. So, I visited with him, and Krista Conte at the time was there. Matt's like, well, talk to Krista, there's things. And I think it really didn't click with them. Like, they just didn't get it, that it had nothing to do, because they're like, well, increases come and go, these things. And I'm like, but it's not that. Now, don't get me wrong, divine timing. Thank you, Jesus, because with the explosion that we are seeing in our industry, had I waited, another 30, 90 days, it would have been a drastically different environment. And the increases in our area that have been astronomical comparatively, we go, okay, well, they took a 60% rate increase. I've got friends in Arkansas that are going, yeah. So here, 15, 18%, would be a quote normal. So 60+% that have a street impact of literally doubling bills, that's not accustomed. So, I was very fortunate in several things. One, in timing. And two, one of the toughest things for me leaving is that I was so involved, and I loved that. Getting to be on council, not because woohoo, I'm on council, but because I genuinely believe in paying it forward. And whether or not they listened, whether or not they did anything with that, that was at least me doing my part to attempt to do better. I got the privilege of doing webinars and peer-to-peer trainings with life insurance and different things. And I loved that. And that was probably the thing that I was concerned most about, because on the independent side, that's totally different. Mm-hmm. I was also very fortunate because at the time that I left, I had a couple of very, very good friends. I said, Jack and I soundboarded, and we're very fortunate to have our paths running parallel. So, we had those resources in each other, but also a very dear friend of mine, Tara Varner. I don't know if you know Tara or not. She's amazing. She's an agent in Jeff City, so just not far from us. She opted to make the transition as well. And I can't imagine not having that colleague to make that journey with, because all of my people, they were still farmers. Mm-hmm. And that's okay. And I would tell people, whatever you choose for your agency is okay. Like, if you choose that it's time for you to leave, that's okay. If you choose to stay, that's okay too. There's no right or wrong, because you can have agencies that are similar in demographic and size and history, and different choices be right for them. So, I have very, very good friends. My best friend is still an agent with farmers, but having those resources, was a huge part for me in that path. But they were also like-minded of the culture is gone. And, but we also sit back and look, dear God, we couldn't have timed that better, because
the hard market and changes haven't slowed down at all.
And and some of the decisions that, we're hearing that are being made. And it's like, I told people when I left that I hope Farmers figures it out. I genuinely hope they figure out, because they owe that to the agents and the DMs and the clients to figure that out. Mm-hmm. And 15 months later, they're still hemorrhaging, not just financially and policies, but beautifully amazing agents are leaving. It's not like we saw, what was it back in like 18, 19 something, right? Where they're like, we're going to take the bottom 10% that are, losing and we're going to remove contracts. Right. I get that. It's crappy. But I mean, as business owners, if we have a producer who's costing us money, we're not going to keep them. I mean, that's just business.
Of course.
They're now hemorrhaging, producing, loyal agents that are going, we can't continue to do business. So I don't know what that future looks like for them. I still genuinely hope they figure it out because their agents and their remaining clients deserve better. I just couldn't stick around to be collateral damage, hoping that would happen when I no longer believed in the brand.
So once you'd made that decision, and it sounds like obviously some friends in the industry too that were going to do the same thing, how did you go about, like researching and finding your next group, your next, cluster aggregator, whoever you choose? Tell us a little bit about that journey.
Yeah. So the one thing that I will tell anybody, and I didn't realize how valuable this was until I had, somebody on the other side go, that's probably one of the smartest things I've heard. I knew I didn't know what I didn't know. I had friends on the other side, we'd have bits and pieces of conversation, but I knew I didn't have a clue of what that looked like. So, I started making phone calls. All of us have people that we know that are in every aspect of the industry. So a good friend of mine, I had, earlier that year, I had been at a conference in Dallas, and a friend of mine that had been away from farmers for several years, he and I had a couple of conversations. And during that, he was like, so when are you going to switch? When are you going to switch? I told him, it's not time. I'll know when I know. And so when that happened on June 6th, I'm like, shoot, picked up the phone and I'm like, it's time. And, he had a good laugh, which was rightfully so, man. I owned it. But I started talking to people who were there. And for every person you talk to, you get a different opinion. My first conversation as far as aggregators go. And that's the thing, is like, now I got to learn what all this means, because there's a difference between clusters and aggregators and all of these terminologies that we sort of interchange that have their own little nuances that, unless you read fine print, are totally different. So the first conversation I had, and I'll just say, was with Taylor with CIA. I had known them for years.
Insurance Soup.
Right. Yeah. I was part of the OG, back when there were a couple hundred people in there, and they were doing, Facebook, when, teaching us how to, target market right down to what kind of ketchup people like, and, which we can't do right now. So I reached out to them and I'm like, okay, I know you guys have something going on. And I was very fortunate in having that conversation the first time, because when I got on a call with CIA, they answered questions I didn't know I had. So they were extremely transparent. And, a little bit of PTSD and as much as I hate the terminology, triggers from coming off of what we had, the reasons I was leaving farmers.
So skeptical.
I'm entirely skeptical and extraordinarily appreciative for transparency. And they were very transparent. And with that, like I said, it answered questions I didn't know I had. So when I went on to have additional conversations, because I wanted to make sure I made a good business decision, not a comfortable decision. Okay, I've known the guys, they've got this, I've got friends that are there, let's go there. I did not want to do that. I actually set out to find reasons not to go with them. Not because of any bad reason, but because I needed to make sure I was making a good business decision, and I didn't know what I didn't know. So, that was a huge blessing, because then when I went to have additional conversations, it made me very aware of the lack of transparency in some of the others. So I would go asking questions and, they would be like, oh, well, we really don't get into that until I need to know now before I even decide if I have another conversation. There were a lot of companies out there. I don't care who you go with. Don't care. Cluster, aggregate, SIAA, CIA, PGI, whatever, there are catches to all of them. You got to read the fine print. I would have some that would go, you own your book. you from the very beginning, you own your book. Cool. But I mean, if you want to leave, there's a 30% buyout.
Exit clauses are huge hooks in there.
Right. Yeah. So it's like, and that's the big thing is like, I'm not planning on going anywhere, but I wasn't planning on leaving Farmers either. So I was real hung up on what exit clauses.
And Farmers never told us they could or would reduce our contract value, right? So there's all of these things. Like one of the things I learned
We've
was
got a whole list of things you didn't know as you were leaving Farmers, right? Because that post I'd put right before I'd left, I'm like, there's things they don't tell you on your way out. Yeah, so that made me, real skeptical and going, okay, what if I have to do this again? Dear God, I hope I don't have to do this again. All of them have catches. It really is just a matter of figuring out long-term what catch works best for you. And I would go through some of these groups and there was a lot of shadiness to them. And they were ones that friends had recommended, like, go talk to this one. Okay, well, that one doesn't want to give me clear answers. Or they're like, okay, we'll talk to this one. Okay, well, that one, I read the contract and it says I have to have to even take out a business loan and that they have full access to everything right down to my accounting books. I don't think so, homeboy.
Mm-hmm. So a lot of times what I noticed really quickly when people were recommending is they had a very shallow understanding, if any understanding of the contract. And when I became a Farmers agent, I did not talk to an attorney about the contract. And then now with my consulting with Accelerated Automation, I have an attorney that I run everything by. And I sent him my contract about 2 years ago and he was shocked that I signed it. He's like, I don't understand why you would sign this. This is extremely one-sided. So when I was a year ago, a little over a year ago, I was looking at going independent and reviewed a lot of contracts. And a couple of resources and things to watch for if you guys are considering this. Overrides are a thing in the independent channel. Commission, them taking a percentage of the commission. A lot of these groups can also negotiate higher commission for you. So you want to ask what that is, because sometimes they'll say, oh, you keep all your commission, the 12%, but they've negotiated 13 and they're taking the 1%. Exit clauses, buy-ins, vesting periods, all of those are things in independent contracts. And I'm sure you have more, but make sure you do that. And resources, if you're like, I don't have a bunch of money for an attorney, first of all, worth the investment, 100%. Spend the $300 an hour or whatever and pay $1,000 to make sure you understand the contract. But if you really can't, then you can plug a contract into that sucker and say, hey, I'm the partner, I'm the affiliate, or I'm the agent in this contract. Where are my liabilities? And you'd be surprised. I've actually done that first and then run the contract by my attorney. And they pointed out almost exactly the same areas. So just some resources as you guys are looking through these. Go ahead, Jennifer.
Yeah. Well, and, and then that's also, you and I've had these conversations on the sidelines since I announced I was leaving. And that's also what we're trying to accomplish here is that awareness and resources. Now, am I an attorney? No, I don't play one on TV. I can go, like you said, hey, when I looked through that contract for that aggregate, here's what the big red flag was for me, or, we're all resources, but absolutely invest in an attorney. And, that was one thing that I did as I was leaving Farmers, because I took that contract going, okay, here's what it says, but how much of this is legal? And we can kind of get into unofficial, points on some of that. I don't care. Here's, what of this is actually enforceable? And then when I got looking at, okay, here's what I'm looking at going at. And what's interesting is the Farmers contracts, there's nothing to them. They're like 2-pagers.
So basic.
And I'm looking at these other ones and they're like 14 pages long. Like I'm sitting there at night for 3 hours with my highlighter because, I'm a Gen Xer and I'm like, I need that in my hand with my highlighter going, I need to know what this means. But, so anyway, so we went through that process. So I initially visited with CIA and then I got looking at some of these others, and where one thing I was super fortunate in is because I had colleagues that had PABs running parallel. I mean, there's a huge difference between, what Jack and his kids are doing with their agency and my agency and Tara's agency and a couple others, but our PABs were running parallel. So we partnered up on some of that. I mean, it was like, he would talk to one, I would talk to one, and he'd be like, yeah, see what you think of them. And I'd be like, yeah, this one, we had these problems. So we would, we teamed that. Now, no one of us ever made a decision for the other, but we were at least able to go, okay, here's what I got from this. if you want to talk to them and see what you think, so we were able to work that from a couple different angles. And that honestly, that relieved a lot of it because there are so many out there. It is overwhelming.
Time consuming. So many, you could spend months researching all these contracts.
Right. And, and I had a clicking, a ticking clock. And, I'm going, man, I got to make a decision, but there's just so much. And not just even in finding who you were going to partner with from a P&C side, but also from a life and health side, because that is completely different. You have to work with an MGA. You cannot get direct appointments. And that structure looks very different than the P&C side. And then with us being securities, we had to have somewhere to hang our securities license and partner with on that. And we need to do branding, and we need to do signage, and we need to close that. But
you need to have all your own systems, your own AMS. You have to have your own rater. You have to have all of your own processes. Right. Learn all the carriers.
Right. Well, and that was one of the big things for me. And one of the, especially coming out of Farmers, a big thing for me is I knew as an independent, you're independent. But there also you can be independent and not alone. So like for me, I didn't want to have to, and again, everybody's different. I've got friends who went with clusters or groups, I can't remember what they're called, where every carrier pays them direct and then they cut a check to whatever. Oh my God, no. I want to make sure that I'm getting my money. I do not want to have to keep up and keep track of every commission from every carrier for every client, for every policy to make sure everything got done right. And then turn around and make sure to send off a check because I suck at sending off checks. Like dear God, that's why we have auto pay on stuff. That was one thing, especially like we had talked earlier, of me not being great at systems and processes. I pay an accountant. I did not want to have to deal with that. People who are great at that, that's awesome. So I know for me, I wanted somewhere where I was getting, for the most part, one direct main check and an itemization commission statement. And whoever was taking their split, everybody gets a split, guys, one way or another, everybody gets a split, that they were taking theirs out of that. So that was a big thing for me. Also, I knew there's going to be all of these carriers and all of these systems. So it was important to me, if I'm going to pay somebody a commission split, and I'm okay with that, I need to get value out of that. I need to have resources and have training. And so I was looking at their training programs, and not just call us if you need something. I mean, like, here's the process of getting you onboarded so that you can be a successful agent. And not many have that kind of structure. I was talking to one of them. I'm like, okay, what does your training look like? And they're like, oh, well, we got this guy. Okay, but you told me you have 70 agents under your master agency. That's another one to watch out for. That's one more piece of the, yeah. Well, and not even sub-producer, but like, hang on, I'll scroll back that minute. But they're like, well, yeah, if you need anything, you call him. I'm like, right, but does he do the training? Well, yeah, he's the trainer for the 70 agents. I'm like, that's not what I'm looking for. I'm not looking for a resource to call if I need help. I need somebody who's going to go, okay, here's how you get into the rater and add a client initially. Not hand-holding, but at least somebody initially to go, and so of course we went with CIA and PGI, and they have that. They have a dedicated trainer for your agency that's vested. Like they get paid based on the success of their agents. So they have skin in the game. For me, that was because I don't know what I don't know. So how am I going to figure out what I don't know if I don't know it?
Well, and that in itself is huge, knowing what you're after. So many agents make the jump too quickly, and they don't spend enough time researching and being really honest with themselves. Because if I can sell anything, but the business side is maybe not my strength, then you do want an organization that has massive training. If you're like, you know what, I'm really not a great salesperson, but I have someone on my team who's great at sales, but I have this huge history of running all these different kinds of businesses, and that's your skill set, then you probably are looking for a different contract than others. So you really need to be able to be honest with yourself. What are your strengths? What are your weaknesses? What are you willing to do? Like you mentioned, accounting. So many people do not realize how different accounting is on the independent channel. And I see that working in their systems and how you are getting every check, a commission statement from every carrier, and you need to reconcile that and then pay your commission to your team.
That just makes me want to throw up even listening. I mean, even thinking about.
Well, and then there's companies that, there's consultants who like you can hire for accounting in your organization. There's AMS systems that can help you with accounting. So there's all these things. But as a farmer's agent, you don't think about that. You get your folio deposit, or as any other captive, most captives get a check. You might get some, we got something from Haggerty, or maybe some flood company we use, but it's not what you run every day.
It's not. Yeah.
Totally different.
And we still, reconcile. So, I mean, that's, that's why I love my Zoom. And we had looked at, some other systems that offer similar and whatever, but they don't have the reporting in there. And I'm a report store.
Yeah.
So I still go in, right? Because we put everything into our Zoom, it's double entry because we use Easy Links, and they'll coordinate, but it's like 5 fields and you got to pay. But anyway, so we still put it in there. But that way, every month or so, I will run a report on my Zoom, and then I can run the commission. And, I'm a complete Excel nerd. So I can export, match, file.
Yeah.
It's like systems and processes, but like I can make the Excel do stuff that you just didn't even. Yeah. So we put in Excel, and I still reconcile because everybody needs checks and balances. And, every once in a while, there'll be like something that's off, and we shoot an email to accounting and they take care of it. Cool. Well worth the percentage that I pay them. But, but I also didn't know that any of those things were things.
Exactly.
So it's as I'm having these conversations, which again, I attribute a lot of that to having that first conversation looking at CIA. And I mean, and I'm not saying that they're the perfect fit for everybody, because they're not. But I will say that of the dozen aggregates, clusters, whatever that we spoke to, they were the most transparent. And I didn't know that, this is, what I want. This is what, I need, until they went through their process with us and answered questions. And I'm like, okay, so now those are questions. Yes, I like that. I don't really care for that. And, and it wasn't perfect,
and there never will be.
No. And it really is just a matter of deciding what you're willing to work on. And also, I will say, and hopefully I'm, not overstepping. If I am, I'm sure Taylor or somebody will message me, as I'm going through all of these contracts, because I literally am reading 14. I'm like, no, I need you, I visit with somebody and he's like, here's this. I'm like, right, but I need to see a copy of your contract. Well, if you know now, email me a copy of your contract, because what I have learned is it does not matter what somebody says. It is a matter of what they can prove in the document that you signed.
So true.
Yeah. What's enforceable in that document. So, going through and reading all those things, and like, so some of them, and because you reviewed them, some of the stuff in there is ludicrous. I'm like, God bless it. But there were things in the contract, when I sat down and went through my highlighter and then sat down with my attorney, and, when I told him, I'm like, okay, am I reading this correct? Am I interpreting this way from a legal standpoint? And he would tell me, yep, that's right, or no, it wasn't, and then things where I had concerns, I went to that, I went to the aggregate, or I went back to that contact and went, hey, in these sections, these are my concerns. And then the conversation was, okay, so we can revisit and, look at amending. And these things are non-negotiables. There was one of them like, I'm not really a fan of this. And like, that's a non-negotiable. Okay, fair.
So there is negotiation to be had. And I think people don't realize a contract is negotiable, and you need to have that legal counsel to make sure that you have someone that is watching out for your best interest, because their attorneys are watching out for their best interest.
Absolutely.
Is business. So always have that lens on it, that this is business. And there is, we hear so much from farmers agents, like the loyalty. And you mentioned earlier about, they gave me this opportunity, or they believed in me. But at the end of the day, like you said, if that person who got the opportunity, or they believed in them, if they were no longer a valuable business partner, they wouldn't continue to be a business partner. So it is business. And myself as a young 20-year-old becoming an agent was very naive in believing a lot of the things that my DM told me. And so I just caution people, but you're right. Going back and negotiating those contracts is hugely important. And really quick, before we move on too much further, I want to just clarify one thing. You mentioned Easy Links. and Agency Zoom. So they do have a full integration. It's one way from natively, and then the other way is through Zapier, but you are part of a group that doesn't allow that outside integration. So that is one thing to keep an eye out when you guys are looking at contracts as well. Is a lot of times they will say you have to use this system, and then they own part of that, and then you have kind of a sub user or location, and then others where they'll say you use whatever you want, we don't care. They really do vary, but there is a little bit more connection there than earlier alluded to. And then even with that commission tracking, there's ways to connect your systems. If they don't have great accounting inside, you can a lot of times connect them to other accounting softwares to kind of work together. Just a few little pieces there for those of you that are listening that are like considering this stuff. So you have some of those facts.
Right. And there's so many moving parts. And the thing is if you get talking to whatever cluster aggregate, whatever, and they're not willing to have a conversation on your contract, walk away. Walk away. If their contract is a hard stop at what it is, walk away.
Likely pretty one-sided at that point.
Right. It is likely pretty one-sided. And if they are hard stopping on having a conversation in the contract, you're going to have problems down the road. Like my unofficial, not an attorney advice is, as a business owner, if there is a contract presented to you and you have concerns in it, if they are not willing to address those concerns and potentially make changes, they may not change everything you want to change, and that's okay. But if they're not even willing to discuss the options, walk away. There were also some of them out there where my thought was, if I'm going to do this, if I'm going to be an independent, my brand is going on my door and it's going to be my brands, right? So, we would have, Farmers Insurance, J. Creed Agency. No, Black Swan Solutions, J. Creed, that is my brand. And there are a lot of them out there, which if you don't read in the contract, you don't realize that it is a co-branding. So you're going to be ABC Agency.
Goosehead's a good example of that. Like you're an independent, but you're a Goosehead agent and they have a branding.
Right. And so you have a Goosehead office. There's one out there, super sweet people, and it was one we considered, Legacy. And they're, built by other agents. You're a Legacy agency, and then you are the subtitle. I had it in my head, I will no longer be somebody's subtitle.
I love that.
Now, right? There you go. Coin that one. Ta-da!
Yeah.
Some days I
no one's subtitle.
I will no longer be anybody's subtitle. I'm not a snack or a subtitle. So, so that was important to me. Now, with our aggregate, because sometimes coding, and I won't get too far off into that. Sometimes we're under a house code, sometimes we're a direct code. Right now, direct codes are few and far between.
Appointments are really difficult right now.
Yeah, damn near impossible. So, there are some things where there is co-branding, right? We'll have paperwork that goes out to our clients because it's under a house code, which is not a bad thing. It means we have access to carriers we otherwise would not have access to, and we're getting top tier commission because of the group production. But so we have that PGI information on there, but my door is my door. And there are some of these out there that's not how that works. I talked a little bit ago about structures that have master agencies. I kind of relate this to, we're going to farmerize this, like Craft Lake. Okay. So as the agency, for those listening,
Craft Lake is the internal broker. So Farmers Insurance has a broker called Craft Lake, which has a lot of different carriers that the agents get access to, but it is under the umbrella of Craft Lake. And if you were to leave Farmers, the Craft Lake policies have to stay with a Farmers agent. Just because they are outside of the umbrella, they don't get to stay with it depends on the appointment, but they don't get to stay with the agent when they leave. There is some that would be direct, but the majority are under the Craft Lake umbrella.
Right. So there's a lot of them that, since they don't count to your contract value, if you get appointed with that same carrier, you can actually do a broker of record change immediately and not be in violation.
Right. So it's the fact that if they're going to bulk, if you leave, it's not like, these are yours because they're outside of Farmers. Right. They stay with the Farmers. You have to do a BOR. You have to get your appointment. And now, like we mentioned, it's January of 2024. Appointments are tough. So it depends on how that looks.
Yeah. There is a process. But anyway,
so you were talking about master agencies.
Right. So master agencies. And I'm not saying it in a negative way. I'm just going to use them as an example because they're the most common example. So SIAA, they're the largest aggregator in the country, but they have arms So for example, in the Midwest, VIAA is their master agency based out of St. Louis. Anybody wants a side conversation on that, I will. I won't get into that publicly on here. I had that conversation. So anyway, so they have that. And then you become an agency under the master agency. So at first you're like, well, I have the support, sort of. I mean, depending, every master, like a district, is going to be different and handle things differently. I've got friends that are part of SIAA and their master agency is phenomenal. There's no guarantees to that. But what that looks like from a monetary standpoint is SIAA is getting a piece of the pie, VIAA is getting a piece of the pie, and then you're getting what's left. And where that really comes into play, at least from what, I have seen, is on things like overrides and bonuses. So for example, not that anybody's getting much bonuses and, that kind of stuff right now, but so let's say you're with a national carrier, let's say Progressive, and your aggregator qualifies for a bonus. Since it's a national carrier, SIAA takes a piece of the pie, then VIAA takes a piece of the pie, and then you get the 40% that's left over. So that hits your pocketbook. I mean, same thing on a commission structure. So having that other layer in there, and that, like, again, that works great for some people. I'm not saying it's right or wrong, but it's something that people aren't aware of until you really start asking the questions. And you don't necessarily know. Maybe that's what we need to do. Maybe we need to create a document of questions to ask.
These are things you should watch for in contracts. I'll work with my attorney on that.
Right. Yeah. Here's the things to watch for. And here's kind of the topics to ask.
Well, and when I started talking to companies, I didn't know what an override was. The first group that told me about that was Agency Collective. And I was talking to them. And, with most of these groups too, the other thing, like where Jen said, I'm not going to talk in detail about this, but most of the time when you get a copy of a contract, they also accompany it with an NDA. They don't want you sharing that contract. You're not allowed to. It's a non-disclosure. And what they do with those commissions and how that looks, because contracts do change, right? So if you became an agent 10 years ago with SIAA, your contract might be different than it is today because they've adjusted it. And that was true
differently.
Correct. And that was true also with, that's true with captive companies too. They change their contracts as the industry changes, as business changes, their priorities and goals change. So if they ask you to sign an NDA, that's completely normal and that's okay to do that.
Even if you're just in conversation, that is absolutely normal.
Totally fine. But again, to make sure that you are abiding by that as well. And then, that legal counsel, that's different. It's you can't plaster and send the contract everywhere, but you can go get advice from your attorney. But yeah, overrides, exit clauses, commission structure, bonuses. On your exit clause, watching for requirements if you want to sell, if you can hand it off to family, if you are going to sell.
Legacy clause.
Yep, legacy. If you are going to sell, what are the requirements? Can you sell to any independent? Do you have to sell to somebody within the group?
Right.
Do they get to approve it? I think the exit clause is, in my opinion, at least one of the things that people don't look at the most because they think it's so far into the future. But that exit clause, like we talked about earlier, it could come up at any time. You just never know what life is going to throw you. And you might think you're going to be an agent for 20 or 30 years, and you might only get 5 or 10, depending on how life goes. Yeah. So make sure you pay attention to that.
Yeah. And, and on the same token of that, and, because I is one. Also, don't get overly hung up, because I got really hung up on the exit clause. And I think that was because of coming out of Farmers like I did. I was very hung up on the exit clause. I delayed finalizing stuff for probably a couple of weeks because I was line by line and back and forth, and attorneys, so it was like, I got overly hung up on it. So absolutely pay attention to it, but understand there is no perfect one out there. There just isn't. And that's because they're protecting their business as well. So you have to kind of come to terms with what you're going to live with. For me, mine, I have a little bit of length in my full vestment. I don't plan on going anywhere, but I have legacy options. I have selling options. I have other options. So if there is a family emergency and things like that, and I have a really good end game once I'm at that vesting marker, once that time frame is up, that end reward in the grand scheme of things is not a huge amount of time, and it's well worth that. So you have to figure out what's it worth to you. If you're at a point in your career where you're like, man, I got 5 years and I'm done, be really careful, because
don't pick a vesting period.
Vesting period. Right. If you
and those will trade off. Those will trade off too with the cost of the contracts, because when I was reviewing that, like we mentioned before, you get a lot of support with CIA. That is definitely what they like talk about and push, and the systems and the training, and there's so much of that. And then there's other contracts that are going to be much more basic, and they might not have a vesting period, they might not have some of those things, but you're going to be a lot more on your own. So you got to figure out what
it's what's worth it's paying for and realize that everything should be, in most situations, everything's negotiable. Buy-ins can be negotiable. Terms in the contract can be negotiable. So everything may not be negotiable, but a lot of things are. Yeah. So, if you were going to make the change from that captive to independent, it has to be looked at, I think even if you were going captive, this is not a short game industry, and this is not a short game transition. Like if you've got a 3 to 5 year plan to be out of insurance, go produce for somebody. Don't make this, because, by year 3, you're going to be kind of finally figuring out the systems for us. And the amount of moving parts that are out there is enormous. Like, it is almost overwhelming. It's worth it. It was for us. It's very worth it. But I was also very strategic in how we did that with carriers, which is something else that, to look at. There are carriers, I mean, of course, they're dwindling down now. There are a lot of carriers out there though, and how you choose which ones to access, or how that aggregator cluster look like in helping you make that decision, is huge, because you want to do that in a way that's strategic. So like for us, we sat down with CIA, PGI, and they went, okay, because of their experience. So like, in your area, these are kind of, here's where we would recommend starting with these carriers, instead of going, ta-da, you have 200 carriers. You have access to 200. I don't want to go to 200 appointments. I'm not going to use them.
Well, and agents think that, right? They think if I go independent, I'm going to have 15, 20 carriers. That is such a huge mistake, because you have production requirements for each carrier. That's a huge misconception as well. People don't realize that they'll pull your contracts for your lack of production.
If you have a direct,
pull it for ratio.
Yeah.
And also you have to understand all those underwriting guidelines. And if you're sending them a constant flow of bad business because you don't understand it, they'll stop doing business with you. So you think
and it can impact everybody else. So if you're on a house code, if you don't have a direct code, which, the perks of using that house code, that sub producer code, is that those production requirements and all of those things are pooled together. Right. So are your loss ratios. So if you're writing crap business and you're having a lot of loss, it not only impacts you, but it impacts everybody in that
the entire group.
Right. So, you have to be able to do good business. But for me, I took a lot of pride in our Farmers products. I can say a lot of things about the changes, but we had damn good products, especially if you wrote them right, if you endorsed them right. We had great products in our area. We had wonderful claims adjusters. We're very fortunate in that. So I knew our clients were taken care of, right? That was our sell on value, right? Is that you got us and we had great claims experience in our area. So for me, I had the moral obligation to maintain those standards for my clients. So for me, I want to be a jack of all trades. I would take clients from independent agents because they were a jack of all trades. You're not mastering anything. So for me, I wanted to find 3 or 4 carriers that had the coverages in our area and that had the claims service. So, we've all built resources over the years. I was calling my roofers that I would refer clients to and going, who are you having problems paying out claims with? And they're like, this one, this one, this one. And I'm like, okay. So from a rate standpoint, these 2 carriers are really kind of rising to the top as we're running quotes. And he's like, that one's great. That one's horrible. Okay. So we're going to take that one out. So being diligent about that, so that kind of narrowed it down. So we have access to a lot of carriers, but, we have 3 or 4 main ones that most of our business goes to. And then we can go, okay, we know what this one wants. We know what this one wants. Do I always remember all of them? No, because that's why we have the link to click on underwriting guidelines when I go, shoot, which one is that? So you have to be able to find the resources. But, being strategic in that, and that goes different with every business model, right? We've got some agencies out there, and God bless them, that non-standard is their baby. So they're going to want very different carriers. Man, God bless it. So they're going to want, the Dairylands, the Bristol West, they're going to want those non-standard markets. So that's going to look different for them. So you have to know who your target clients are and what policies they're going to need so that you can go, okay, and have that conversation with whoever you're partnering with, whether it's an aggregate cluster, whatever, and go, okay, and a lot of them, I'm assuming a lot of them, ours did anyway, they're going to require a business plan, by the way. Business plan and how many years? I'm like, geez, do I remember how? So they're going to want to know that. So you're going to need to know what that is so that you can continue to be an expert at what you are doing, just an expert with more options. Because the last thing I wanted was for us to end up being we got 200 carriers, best of luck, man. Again, it's overwhelming and you can't logically keep up with product knowledge and carrier knowledge if you were ran that thin. So yeah, I mean, it's a lot. And I've got people all the time asking me, what's it like? It's craziness, but it was worth it. Those first 30 days, girl, like it doesn't matter how much training you get, like until you start hitting submit buttons, you don't know what's going to come up on the other end of that. Because the trainers can go, okay, we're going to get you to this point. Then you're going to hit submit and like, you're going to see verbiage you didn't even know existed. I thought I was really smart in our industry. And then I got into like the Allstate system and hit submit and it wanted me to, I can't remember what, cross index it's called. I'm like,
what?
That's matching your multi-policies. You go in, you click and you go, yep, there's the matching house. No idea. And that's on that other end. So even as, if you have somebody training you or the modules in the carriers or whatever, like that's on the other side of the submits. So it's like that first 30 days, I told people it's like baptism by fire, but then we realized we're a freaking Phoenix, so it's fine. And now I got a great big thigh tattoo to match it, so it's fine.
That's awesome.
We have a 1 year anniversary,
so cool.
And I'm like, yeah, right. So this is giant Phoenix on my thigh. But the main thing is that once you're looking on this side, there is so much. It literally is the drinking from a fire hose, but for us, it was worth it. I wasn't afraid of hard. I was afraid of mediocrity and complacency. Hard doesn't scare me. Any of us that have built an agency to a point that is significant enough to be considering making these changes has survived hard, because owning an agency, running an agency, getting past those first couple of years as an agency owner, whether it's big or small, what is it, like less than 30%? Survive the first 2 years or something. It's probably less than that now.
When I was a reserve agent, there was probably at least 15 or 20 people who came through trying to go career at the district office in Olympia, Washington, where I started. And it was just like a revolving door. And I remember one day asking my DM, I'm like, why are there so many people in and out of here? And he's like, because people love the idea of owning an insurance agency, but there's just a small percentage that can actually do the work. And right. I remember my first year as a scratch agent sitting in my office and crying in the beginning because I was investing so much and thinking, okay, like I need more leads or I need more marketing, but I also have to like buy groceries, right? So if you started young and poor in the insurance industry, there's so much upside, which is amazing. And then there's people who come in, in their mid 30s, tons of experience or later in life with a bunch of money and they can cash flow. There's so many different entry points and we all have different experiences, but it is really just taking that risk. Easy. None of them are easy. Even if you have that big nest egg to come in, there's so much to learn. And then you learn it and then it changes a couple months later anyways. So it's constant. Right.
The only constant is change. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And it's funny because, we have so much change in business, which again is great for my personality because I am a lifetime learner. Dear Lord, if I can give any advice to anybody in our industry, you have to be a lifetime learner and you have to be a student of the industry constantly. But yeah, so we have so much change that like on my personal stuff, I'm like, I'll drive 2 hours to get to my hairdresser if she moves, because like, I'm not changing that. And, my nail person, my accountant, my banker, I'm like, dear, no, we're not changing any of this stuff. Just all of this part of my world is so much change. But, that's the thing is, hard wasn't what I was afraid of at all. And like I said, any of us that have gotten to this point, we get hard, but for us, it was worth it, and I'll just kind of put this out here. And this is just me personally, but it kind of runs consistent with others that I had talked to along the way. We are at 15 months, or I'll just go at our 1 year mark. We were at roughly 65% at the 1 year mark of what my premium was the day I left after 7 years.
At Farmers. Mm-hmm.
So, right. Closing ratios, like we rarely lose business. We just don't. I'm not saying that we don't at all, but I mean, we rarely do. Our referrals have shot through the roof. I had people that we had known, because I am an agency, we don't buy leads. That's not what we're good at. I've got friends that are agents, and man, they rock and roll leads too. I can't buy leads to save my life. Like, we're relationship, 85% of our new business always came in as referrals, because we built relationships, and that's just our business model. And people that we had relationships with, lenders, realtors, things like that we had good relationships with, but we never really got referrals from, we switched over to the independent side. Now all of a sudden I'm getting their referrals, because they were needing people who knew what they were doing, but had options, and we didn't have those options. So, our referrals have gone up. Our closing ratios are substantial, especially right now, as hard as the market it has gone. So, for us, the trade-off was well worth it, but it's not a decision to take lightly whatsoever, which I think then transitions us into the things you didn't know farmers would do when you went to leave. And
one thing I wanted to add on the carrier piece, when we were talking about that, something that isn't usually common knowledge is that we think of, in the captive side, all of our companies kind of flow through one system, or we have like an access to it. There are carriers out there who will flow into like AMS systems, things like that. And AMS is, think of, if you're a farmer's agent, think of your agency dashboard, right? That you manage all your policies, or Apex now. And then all state agents have a similar portal, and all these different captives and state farm agents. But an AMS is kind of what pulls from all these different carriers, and you can manage through that. That happens through Ivans downloads, but there are carriers who do not download through Ivans. So there are carriers where you are going, and this would be for a farmer's agent listening, similar to like Foremost. You have to go to Foremost, our website, and you have to go to the notifications, like the agency report, and see all of the coding for like the endorsements, right? That is still a thing on the independent channel. So if you're thinking, I don't care, like I'm not going to be like Jennifer and have 3 or 4. Yeah, I'm going to have 3 or 4 carriers. I want 20 carriers. Think about going to about half of those directly every day to see what the heck is going on with your customers. So a lot of this too is manpower, business structure. You talked about a business plan, knowing if you are going to be a turn and burn lead, rewrite agency, if you're going to be a non-standard agency, if you're going to be a relationship type agency, because those all have a very different structure. And most of the agents I talk to on the farmer side or the captive side, they haven't really put that thought into it going in, right? What am I going to do? Well, I'm going to do some relationship building. I'm going to buy some leads. I'm going to do some of this, some of that. But that's a different structure in your staff, in your processes, in your day-to-day for each of those different types of decisions as well. But those carrier accesses, that was always interesting to me, that some of those carriers to this day, they're like, no, you can't integrate here. You just have to go to our website. And that's a lot of websites to go to.
Yeah. And even based on specific products. So, for example, Travelers, we use Travelers a lot. Mm-hmm. And Home and Auto will integrate into the Rater and the AMS. But if we need to quote boat, umbrella, other things like that, we have to go in and go direct. Mm-hmm. So, that varies. And, and like I said, we have, 4 or 5 main carriers we use on the personal line side, right? And then we have, our commercial line side. If you're going to be doing commercial, make sure whoever you're partnering with gives you good commercial support. Because what I found is a lot of aggregates and clusters and whatever are very personal lines focused. And they don't have the contracts, the connections, and the support on the commercial side. And if you like commercial, I love working with our small business owners. There's a lot of moving parts. Well, there's also even more moving parts on the independent side when you get into the commercial. So having either, super in-depth knowledge on that, or having support is going to be huge. But, the super cool thing is though, and I was talking to a girlfriend of mine out on the East Coast that had made the transition right out a year ago, is you get to make it whatever you want it to be though. So, when you're on the captive side, we all know it, right? Well, we want you to have this much in personal lines and this much in commercial and this much in life and this much in financial services and all of these things. You have to, master all of them to hit your accolades or whatever that's going to look like. Man, if you don't ever want to write a commercial policy, don't. No one gives a damn. If you want to only write commercial, if you want to only do life, if you don't want to do a life policy, no one cares. Like, you absolutely, when you go to figure out what you want your agency to look like, you absolutely get to decide what you want your agency to look like. whether that is from, like Mariah was saying with, how that business is going to your target people, but also the products that you want to offer or don't want to offer. If you go, dear God, I can't stand writing X, Y, and Z. I don't understand it. You don't have to.
Well, those are great opportunities for referral partnerships, because there's going to be an agent in your town who does want to write that. And then, if you're licensed in the same state, you can share commissions with other agencies. I think that's what a lot of people also don't realize, is that if you're like, I never want to write life, but I'm licensed for life and I'm going to send it somewhere else, you can create a contract with another agency, depending on your group or your cluster contract, whatever you sign. Check that first. But you could sign a deal with an agent in your area that says, when I send you life and you write it, I get this commission because you're licensed. That's totally legal. So there is all of these, there's a lot of other options out there. I know agents who get their lender, their NLS ID number or whatever.
MLS,
and then they refer mortgages and they get a commission. Like, there's lots of revenue streams that can be had. Again, always make sure you're reading your contracts, but if you don't want to write it, you don't want to write it, but you get to decide. I know an agent in my district, in my original district, he spoke Spanish and all he wanted to write with auto insurance, and only for people who spoke Spanish. I'm actually not sure if he's an agent anymore. I'd have to go look if he's a farmer's agent. I'm not even sure, but I'll tell you specific. But I'll tell you, my DM was always on him about cross-selling his book and writing more and hiring staff and blah, blah, blah. And it drove him crazy. I eventually moved out of the district office just so the district manager couldn't get to him as much. So if you've had a lot of issues with product being forced down your throat, now as comp plans change, there's a lot more freedom on the independent side. There's also a lot more responsibility and a lot more, I think, would you agree that you have to have, would you agree you have to be kind of a better business owner to run an independent agency than a captive?
I think so. I think it definitely challenges you in those aspects. Like, it makes you stretch your abilities, which is not a bad thing, because you have to be more diligent and aware of more moving parts, and more responsible to carriers. I feel like sometimes we, as agents, we go, well, our agent perspective. Right. That's not really how that works. Like, you have to be cognizant and respectful of carrier guidelines and underwriting, because if you can't get their access, you being an agent doesn't mean anything. So it does, from a business perspective, stretch you in seeing bigger pictures, seeing more exposures, organizing how you're going to manage those things, which is a work in progress. I mean, we're hitting renewals. And we're like, oh, shoot, okay, how are we going to manage renewals? So we're kind of, figuring that out as we go. But it does force you to stretch a lot as a business owner, not just as a salesperson, because just as your access and everything spreads and changes, so does the business end of all of those things to correlate.
Yeah, for sure. Well, we're a little over an hour, which I've appreciated. I've really enjoyed this discussion. You shared so much helpful information for agents. Is there anything that you want to leave people with, kind of as like a final thought in, your experience being a little over a year now on the independent side? Maybe something you wish you would have known that we haven't touched on yet.
So one, and we can always conversation a little bit later on, I think too, coming from farmers specifically, there are a lot of things in that exiting process that they don't make you aware of that are not huge deals, but you need to be aware of. So we can kind of, get together and catch up and kind of go through some of those things a little more specifically. So I know that we have a lot of people out there that are not just farmers, but that's good information for them to have. But my advice would be to, one, realize what's right for you is not right for everybody, and give other agents grace. We see it so much, especially on social media, where there is so much negativity in people, for those who chose to stay or those who chose to leave. Both can be right and coexist. So give other agents grace, because what's right for you isn't right for everybody. And go into it knowing you don't know what you don't know. You can, be royalty in your captive. That doesn't mean squat on the independent side. Take your crown off, humble yourself, and be willing to learn, and give yourself some grace, because you don't know what you don't, but also make sure you're doing your homework. Like if you're going to do this, do your homework, take your time, consult with us, consult with others. Don't go, oh my God, yay, look at Jen, she did this, so I'm just going to ask her opinion and follow what she did. No, because what I did may not be right for you. I can give you my experience, but that doesn't mean that it's going to be a right fit. So do your homework, make sure you understand things, take the lessons that you learned with wherever you're at, right? Because if people are leaving Farmers, they're like, well, had I known in the beginning, and go, shoot, right? And make sure this time you know those in the beginning. And really, like we were just saying, dive into who you want you and who you want your agency to be so that you can find whatever partnership or not. I think right now, you almost have to have a partnership to switch over.
Direct is really hard.
Make sure, make sure that you know who you are and what you want that to be so that you can make the right long-term choices in the partnership. And no, it doesn't matter. None of them are free and none of them are perfect. You just have to find the one that fits you best and the people that fit you best. Contract may be great, but if you don't have a good connection with the people you're talking to in the beginning, you are not going to have a good connection a year from now when you're having problems and need help. So, definitely hold value in those things and have fun. Dear God, give yourself grace and have fun. And remember, whatever kind of chaos right now is, it won't be.
Yeah. Always changing. That's definitely for sure. I lost an employee because she didn't like change. So if you don't like change, this is not the industry for you.
Right. Yeah. Go find
lesson number one, if the change is driving you crazy, don't change from captive to independent. It's just going to be more of the same. It can't be a reason to make your shift. Well, thank you so much, Jennifer. Yeah. I really have appreciated your time and I've appreciated you sharing your story. And, when you did make that change, you were very upfront and shared so much information with agents. So I appreciate you doing that. I'm excited to see, you're already at 65% of your book value in like a year. So I'm excited to see you announce when you're like, okay, we're there. We've already, regained our whole book and now we're just, growing past that point. So thank you again. And, guys, tune in for the next episode. We'll continue to record these and have, experiences from all different agents, not just Farmers agents, but that's definitely the initial connections I have. So those are a lot of these initial interviews, but we'll be talking to agents that have transitioned from other companies as well. So thank you so much.
Yeah, absolutely. And remember, pay it forward, guys, because none of us can do this stuff alone. And we'll catch up soon, Mariah. I appreciate you and all that you guys are doing.
Thank you.